Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the New Ground Life and Leadership Podcast. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Joel Harris. Joel works for Kintsugi Hope, which is a Christian mental health charity that works alongside and with local churches. Has a vision to set up wellbeing groups and seeing them established across the country, places where people can experience safety and support and gain self-confidence and have a deeper understanding of God's love. Joel is the youth and students coordinator for them. So I'm looking forward to learning more about that role. He's also a YouTuber. Joel, I see you've produced over 150 videos, which is pretty impressive. And he's a big Ipswich Town football fan. Well, nobody's perfect. Welcome,
It's going
Joel.
well. Thank you. Thank you for having me. It was going well until the nobody's perfect.
um, Joel, we connected a few months ago. We're looking forward to having you come and speak at New Day for the festival this summer. Um, and when we spoke last time, you shared with me some of what God's done in your life and how you came to faith and your journey through that and some of the challenges that you've overcome and stuff. And I would love to just start this conversation by just giving people a chance to get to know you and hear a bit about what God's done, because I found it so encouraging. So you can take that question wherever you want and lead us into the weeds of your life.
Awesome. That sounds good. Well, so I've grown up in Ipswich, born and bred. I'm a pastor's kid. My parents have led a church here in Ipswich for must be around 27 years. So they've been
Hmm.
here for a good amount of time. Roots
You're a
deep.
pastor's kid. Sorry to
Pastor's
interrupt.
kid,
That's
yeah.
I mean, my sympathies go out to you.
That in itself is something, isn't it? I think,
Yeah, well, I'd love to hear more about that. We'll come
yeah.
back to that. Carry on.
No,
Sorry.
it's fine. Well, on the pastor's kids, I realised very early on when I speak to people about being a pastor's kids are either put into two categories. The first category is like the prodigal son, and they just run away from church. And they're like, I'm done. I don't want this. Or the other category is you just accept your fate, and you're like, this is just my life, and that's fine. And for me, I think I've been blessed enough for always just to be an acceptance of it. I've loved being a pastor's kid. I think I've seen under the bonnet of church in a very unique way what's been super inspiring and helpful. So yeah, really do enjoy it. So I've grown up as a pastor's kid. When I was 4, we found out that I was severely dyslexic and I had a speech impediment. So going into primary school was an interesting thing for me. So I couldn't really speak that well. Like I remember in reception class, it was my birthday, and I was in assembly in front of the whole school, and the teacher was like, "Oh, what did you get for your birthday?" And I said something, and nobody could understand me. So I remember my mum having to shout out from the back of the assembly hall what I'd got because nobody could understand me. I remember in year 6 getting 0 out of 12 on my spelling test every single week. I was
Wow.
consistent in not being able to spell.
Wow.
I remember in year 6 walking down from the year 6 classroom to the year 2 classroom to get my Biff and Chip books. I never made it further than that.
Oh,
So
bless
I knew going into the summer of year 6, so moving into high school, I knew a few things very much about me is that I couldn't speak well, I couldn't write well, and I couldn't spell. So those are some fundamentals I knew. And I couldn't read. I thought I couldn't read. And this is something interesting for me is whenever I read, I was always taught to read out loud. And I can't do that at all. But in the summer of year 6 going into year 7, I read Harry Potter. I know for some Christians they'll think I'm suddenly going to hell for it. But I read Harry Potter and I just loved it. And I realised I can read, but it's the connection from my to my mouth what isn't working. So I'm an avid reader. I absolutely love reading. I just can't read out loud. So that was an interesting revelation for me. For first, I've realised no, maybe this dyslexia thing isn't all what's going on. There's some other stuff happening. So in
Is that
primary
still the
school,
same to this day as well? You
yeah,
can't read out loud.
can't read out loud. So when I preach,
Fascinating.
when I preach, I have notes. I don't have a full script because I couldn't read it. If that makes
Yeah.
sense. So when I preach, when I write, so I love preaching. I feel called to preach. They ask me to read the Bible verse out in the front of church, and I'll crumble. That's I just can't do it. So I know what I can do, know what I can't do. In primary school, I struggled with being bullied. So I went into high school really knowing a few things about me and not probably having a great amount of self-worth in all of that. So in high school, 13, 12-year-old Joel was like, I don't want to be seen. I don't want to be known. Because to be known and to be seen allows people to be mean, and I don't want that for my life. So I went into high school trying not to be seen, but actually stuff made me be seen simply due to my dyslexia. I had a laptop in my class when everyone else didn't. And because of that, I arrived to class 5 minutes late and left 5 minutes early to put my laptop away. Those sort of things are very hard not to be seen in that point of view. So I went through year 7 and probably year 8 feeling like a shell of my former self, and actually starting to lead a double life. So in church, I had a great group of friends. It was always my happy place. It was always the place where I loved, what was good for me. So in church, I was always good. I had great friends, and I was very lively, very outgoing, very much wanting to be the center of attention. But in school, I was the opposite. And that started to affect me. And in year 8, I started to watch YouTube. I watched these YouTubers and I realized a few things. I realized these YouTubers, everyone loves them. That's what I want. They have a lot of money. I would like that. And they don't go to school. I would really like that. So I thought, I know what? That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do that. I'm going to become a YouTuber. So I started posting YouTube videos. And as I started posting YouTube videos, about a year into it, I got invited to my first meet and greet. So meet and greet is where you'd meet people who watch your videos. Some people would call them fans. They take photos of you and that sort of thing. And I was invited to do that. I think I must have been 14, 15 probably, in Leicester Square.
Oh, so that happened quite quick. Sorry. So
Yeah,
you're
so it was probably
to get into YouTubing. I mean,
that was
you're
about
not
a
helping
year.
the parents here who tell their kids it will never happen.
Yeah,
Don't give yourself. So,
there was about a year between the two, between
oh
starting
wow.
and doing it. Around a year, I would say.
And
Give
what
or
sort of things were you making videos about?
Oh, just stupid stuff, anything. And is I guess for me right now, looking back, it's upsetting because at each part of my YouTube videos, I can tell you who I was trying to be because they're the ones who were popular at that point.
Okay.
So it was very much my first few years, very much trying to copy somebody else who's famous because that was my only way of understanding how I could be famous, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
So from this meet and greet, I got put into a circuit of doing events, doing shows. We did a tour. We did these gigs where you'd turn up to a small venue, maybe 100, 200 person venue, and we'd put on a show. I would MC, so I'd host. I
Wow.
would talk about that sort of stuff, and then we'd have people who were on the X Factor, up and coming singers, and they would sing. Then we'd do a meet and greet afterwards, and everyone would go home happy. And that's really what it was.
And you
And
were
I
about
did
15 at this time, were you?
15, yeah, 15.
Wow.
And I did that for about 4 years of doing that. So I still had this utter divide in my life of school being quiet and shy, and then on the weekends jumping around on stage having people scream my name.
Wow. And did the people at school know about your YouTubing?
They did know, and I guess that was the other thing. I didn't help myself with. I wanted to be known, so people saw me. I remember a lot of times people know. I remember being asked to come into another classroom in form time, and the teacher had put on my YouTube videos, and the whole this class, 30 of my
Wow.
fellow students were watching it, and stuff like that. Well, it wasn't always nice, but I guess that's what you get when you do YouTube and that
And
sort of
did
thing.
that increase your social standing at school?
No, I don't think so. It may
No.
have. I don't think so. I think, and I don't think that was anything to do with my fellow students. I think that was more to do with me compartmentalizing everything what going on in primary school and going, actually, school isn't the place for me.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that was to do with other people not accepting me, but me not being me probably not wanting to be accepted.
Mm.
I couldn't get past. Oh, this has not been a good place for me before, so I'm not sure how it can be a good place for me now. if that
So
makes
you
sense.
think you kind of kept people at arm's length at school
Yeah, definitely.
because you were nervous of being
Yeah,
rejected?
yeah, definitely. So I did that, and that was really fun. And through that time, my faith got bigger. I grew more my faith, grew more of what do I want to do in my life, what do I want to be, all that sort of stuff. My dyslexia was still there. I still really struggled with that, but I started to learn that actually it was maybe not always a bad thing. I was recalling recently, I was in DT class in year, must have been 8 or 9, and we had this proper rough DT teacher, this lady who was just hilarious and just proper rough, proper just say it as it is type of person. And she was like, "You got to write this essay." And I went up to the teacher and went, "I'm going to need a bit of extra time. I'm dyslexic." And I was quite embarrassed and like ashamed of it. And she just punched me in the arm. I went, "You lucky sod. You are so lucky that you're dyslexic because you think now completely differently to everyone else in this room. And you'll be way more creative than anyone else in this room because of it."
Wow.
And it was the first time I'd ever told a teacher and they hadn't looked at me with sympathy but looked at me with jealousy. And that was a big shift for me. Going, oh,
Wow.
actually there is creativity. So all my filming, I learned how to edit, I learned how to film by myself on YouTube, just doing all this stuff. So we did all these meet and greets, we did all these things, and it was going well. I had brands sending me clothes. Everything looked great, but probably at the age of 18, my whole identity had started to form on social media. So I was so my whole identity started to form on social media. So I was happy if I got 2,000 likes one week, but I'd be so sad if I got 1,000 likes the week after. And my whole identity was like that. I was up, down, up, down, up, down. And as I was 18, I think for a season the likes started to not to come as much, and I really struggled with that. And I got really low. I kind of burnt out from all of this social media stuff. I kind of burnt out from everything that had happened. And in that burnout place, I felt God go, "Joel, who are you doing this for? These past 4 years, you've built your own name, you've built your own platform. Where am I in this?" I told my Christian friends I was doing this for God, and I wasn't, if I'm being honest. I was doing it for my own affirmation. And in that place, I started to go, okay, maybe I need to change my social media. Maybe I need to change what I do something else. So after a break, I started to release Christian content. Naively, I thought, you know what? I'm going to get 1 million followers straight away because I'm doing it for God. Then it must be good.
Mm.
I lost 70% of my audience in the first year doing it.
Wow.
And that was the whole process in itself going, where's your acceptance from, Joel? Where's your identity from,
Mm.
Joel? So that was really what I was doing. And then I left school, I left sixth form. And I interned with 2 different organizations. One was a charity called Make Jesus Known, helping their social media stuff. And the other charity was Kintsugi Hope. So I interned Patrick and I followed him about and all the stuff Kintsugi was doing. At that point, Kintsugi was a year old, a year and a half old. And I joined, and they were kind of like, we have these well-being groups. These well-being groups are 12 weeks long. They're kind of like Weight Watchers or Alcohol's Anonymous, but for your mental health. What would it look like to do this for young people? So I started to readjust some of the material, and we readjust the material from 12 weeks to 6 weeks, and we released it. And since then, I've been now at Kintsugi for 3.5 years. I'm the intern that basically never left. I just was like, "Oh, you're stuck with me," and we now have this material. What 6 weeks long? What churches, schools, youth groups partner with us to run, and we've seen 1,500 young people go through these wellbeing groups. 2/3 them being in schools. We've seen schools make this part of their curriculum. We've seen people come into these groups who were suicidal and left with a friend, and life just that little bit easier.
Mm.
One of my favorite things for me is we have evaluation form what every young person does each after their session. And one young person wrote the highlight of their group was the fact that they found a voice. And that for us was really, and for me is really what it's all about. We're trying to allow young people to find a voice. So I went from doing the social media stuff and doing that to now working for Kintsugi full time, writing this material. And the most interesting thing for me, and the thing what I'm so blown away by, and just so grateful for God, is a majority of my job is to preach, is to speak, and is to write. I went into high school knowing I couldn't speak well, I couldn't write well, I couldn't talk. I now do that. And I want to make this clear. I am not healed by dyslexia. I'm not healed whatsoever. I still have a speech impediment, and over the past year and a half, it has got worse. But actually, that's okay. There's this whole thing what Paul says in 2 Corinthians 4, I had a thorn in my flesh, and 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me. But he said, no, my grace is sufficient for you. For my power is made perfect in weakness. Actually, I believe that when I go on stage and when I speak, when I do this stuff, if God doesn't show up, it is pointless. I know I can't do this without God moving in me, because I can't. I can't do it. I'm dyslexic, I can't speak. But actually, God shows up and God works through my brokenness. And I think actually that story is way more powerful than me going, hey, I'm healed from dyslexia and now I do this stuff. It's going, no, every day this is a faith journey. Every day this is a journey going, God, let's do this. Let me work in my brokenness. And I guess I'm more aware now than I ever have been, is the best way to show Jesus to your non-Christian friends is to completely show your brokenness and show how God uses even that for his glory.
Wow. Thank you, Joel. That was very moving. And there is lots in everything you just shared that I'd love to pick up on. I tell you where my brain goes first of all is, and it's just a book I'm reading at the moment. Talks about the fact that for the past few decades or so, the kind of the way of finding our identity in the modern West has been what sociologists call expressive individualism. This idea that I will know who I am by how I express that my inner self in the world. Not unfamiliar to us, but this book's making the case that actually in recent years we've seen a shift away from expressive individualism towards what some sociologists call performative individualism. That is, my identity is expressed in my performance in the world.
Yeah.
And the rise in social media has kind of exacerbated this, but it's this sense of I will know that I'm valuable, I will know that I'm worthwhile when people are giving me attention, when I am performing well. And therefore, the thing we fear most of all is failure and of being overlooked and ignored. And so I think a lot of what you've been talking about there kind of has been reminding me of that this is a battle to gain people's attention. But then when we've got it, to realize actually that doesn't satisfy, that doesn't make me feel secure and loved and seen and known. And there's something you said about when you first attended secondary school that I found really quite interesting. You wanted to be known by people, but you were scared of being known by people, because to be known and then be rejected is terrifying. And so it's much easier to hold people at arm's length and perhaps to seek out an audience in the anonymous space of the internet, because at least we can say they're rejecting an avatar, a digital version of us. What are some of your reflections on that performative individualism and how you see that playing out in your own heart or the lives of people around you?
I think it's so true. I think social media is a massive part of that. I guess in my own story, how I used to always explain what social media was to people who don't do social media influencing is going, imagine you went into your job and you got paid not by what degree you had, not by the work you did, not by how long you did your work or how good your work was, but you got paid by how much your colleagues like you. That's what social media influencing is. And that's why it can so easily play on your identity, because it's utterly about people's view of you. And you can measure that so deeply with analytics, likes, comments, followers, shares. You can measure it all. And that's like a major version of it. But we have that in our whole ecosystem, don't we, in the West, and especially in England. Like, if we think of schooling, you're measured on your success, you're measured on your performance, you have stats, you have your report of this is what we think we're going to get, this is what we think of them. I remember, like, my report, you have a big thing all about your grades you're going to get, and a little thing of the teacher was like, oh, this is Joel, we really like him, he's really lovely, or he's been naughty in class. And you have a little bit about the person, you have so much about the performance. And actually, we're built to be wired for performance, aren't we? School builds us to go, your performance is what matters, your grades is what matters. And as someone who's dyslexic, I've come to realize I sometimes thought I was stupid and dumb. And that's not because I am stupid and dumb, but because the way the schooling system's programmed isn't for somebody like me. So actually, I was going to fail in that, not because of anything of me, but just because it's not built for people who are different, people who learn differently. So I think performance is massive. I think we're seeing it a lot with young people, and people want to perform on social media. Young people want to perform in front of their friends. Young people want to perform in front of their parents. If you're a child and you've grown up, and the only time you've ever got affirmation from your parents is if you did something well, or if you got a good grade, or if you performed, or if you did something good, you're wiring into your children's brain the only way to get affirmation is through performance. So I think there's a massive culture right now of actually we're having to perform, and that's due to many things. And I guess the way you get out of that, the way you get out of trying to live in a performance-based world, is to shift your identity on something that doesn't matter about your performance. And that for me is my faith. That for me is God. It's going, no matter what I do, no matter if I never preached ever again, God's view and love for me wouldn't change. No matter if I stopped working right now, no matter if I stopped doing everything I did, no matter if all I did for the rest of my life was sit in this room, God's view and love for me wouldn't change. That's not performance-based, that's love-based.
Yeah, and it's a love based on the performance of our older brother Jesus, isn't it? Who has done what we could never have done. It strikes me that we have this kind of this double-headed beast, if you like, that, like you said, at school we're appraised and critiqued for our competency, but on social media, and what you're saying is often, I think, socially, that's increasingly the case. We're appraised on our likability.
Yeah.
And so we've got to be both competent and really lovely people and liked by lots of people at the same time, which actually means
exhausted.
Yeah, we're exhausted, anxious, we're trying to fight on two fronts, and those two things don't always go together, because sometimes the right thing to do is very, very unpopular. And we're finding that, particularly as Christians who are holding on to an ancient tradition, who believe the wisdom and teachings of Jesus passed down, that's not culturally bound, it's timeless. And to hold on to that and to prize that in a generation that says, just say nice things, just say things that make you popular. So I think this is something that we can certainly all relate to, the anxiety, the stress and the strain that produces. And it strikes me Jesus's antidote is therefore go into secret and pray to your Father who's hidden. It's a retreat from, because it's a so I'm a millennial, so I got this. I'm a middle child as well, so performance and wanting to be noticed is in me as well. But I think your generation, because of the internet, has just taken those seeds that were in me and my generation and has just produced this inferno of craving and attention seeking and approval ratings all the time, which is just exhausting and tiring for people. And I think when you then come to Christ, you're right, you get handed an identity that says you're loved, but you've still got this battle between trying to be honest and authentic with God that isn't based on performance, but everything you know about how to be in the world is about performance. So how have you I'm finding my way to a question here. How have you found in then you said taking your faith more seriously and being a disciple of Jesus? How have you found the conflict between this thing of I need to perform well and then no, actually I'm loved and I just need to be honest and real with God, and that isn't performance related pay and affection? Have you found there to be a dissonance with some of that?
Yeah, it's a massive shift. It's really hard because for me, in terms of performance and knowing I'm loved, there's a couple of things. One, I want to do the best job I can at anything I do. The Bible says, do everything like you're doing it for the Lord. Yeah, I want to have an excellency. There we go. Our excellency of my work and of what I do, but also I don't want that excellency to turn to perfectionism and perfection, what is unachievable. So it's that shift, and there's a massive shift between perfectionism and biblical excellency. Perfectionism is unreachable, unattainable. I will never get there. You can have an excellency around you, what isn't perfection. So actually, I want to seek excellency, what is countercultural, what is different to what the world is saying, but it's still a standard and a level of, I want to do this at the best of my abilities, but I'm aware even that will not achieve perfection. So it's going, God, I want to do this for you, and I'll do this well, and I'll do this right. But even I know I'm going to fall short, and that's okay because you still love me and you still go for me. It's working out of a place of acceptance, not working to be in the place of acceptance. And that's the shift. And it's a massive shift, and it's really hard. And I think even when you work in church work or in Christian ministry, it's still really hard because there's still like, I want to be good. It's hard for me. If you go on stage, you want those people to like you. Like as a very human, natural response of going, I want you to like me. But it's being able to go, actually, even if you don't, even if it doesn't matter, God still loves me, and that's what matters. And I guess I haven't got an answer for it because it's something I'm still trying to work out. I'm not sure this side of heaven I'll ever get to that beautiful spot where I am fully know just how much I'm loved. And actually, no matter what happens, that's okay. I think it's always something I've got to catch myself up on. It's always something I've got to watch out for. Going, Joel, in what way are you doing this? I was reading today, and about the story of David, and I'm going for the story of David at the moment, and there's a point where David just gets crowned for all of Israel. He becomes the king, and it's the verse is along these lines, so don't quote me because I've not got the Bible right in front of it. It's along the lines of going, David knew the Lord had blessed him and exalted him for the purpose and for the benefit of God's people. David's leadership, David's promotion to being king was not for his own sake, was not for his own thing, was not for anything but for his own gain or for his own purpose. The reason of his promotion was for the people he was leading. And actually, for me, it's looking at if you're in a place of leadership, it's readjusting your view of going, this leadership's not for me. The reason I'm here is not for me. The reason I'm doing stuff is not for me. It's for the people that you are leading. And I guess when you work out of a performance-based place, it's easy for you to think the reason I'm promoted, the reason I'm leading, the reason I'm doing stuff is for my own benefit. But shifting it, going, actually, all of this stuff is for the benefit of somebody else, I think is an easier way to take yourself out of this performance-based narrative.
Yeah, that's really good, Joel. Really wise. And I think so. My brain's gone in different directions of where we could take the conversation because on the one hand, I think I think everybody who preaches has had the experience of feeling as though you're boring people or people aren't quite with you. At least I hope everyone has. Maybe it's just me. But it's that horrible moment when you step off the platform or you sit back down in your seat and you just think, oh, that was bad.
Yeah.
And what often I've realized, what I mean is, I didn't get good feelings from people while I was speaking.
Yeah.
That's not to say what I was saying was good or bad, but I've learned in those moments I have to say to the Lord, it was for you. I'm
Yeah.
serving them and I'm trying to honor you. It's not
Mm.
about the good feelings that I get from doing this, which is really important. The other thing that really comes to me as you're talking is this: you're very wise. And that's not to, I'm not trying to flatter you. I think your answer is very humble, very wise. And I wonder if part of where that humility and wisdom's come from is some of the physical challenges, like you said, the dyslexia and speech impediments that you've had to overcome, reaching a point of learning to boast in your weakness, which feels so counterintuitive and so countercultural as well. um, i'd love to I'd love to hear more about that, because what you said was God hasn't healed me of this, and actually I think that in many respects is better, or you've made your peace with that and realized actually in not healing me, this is actually really good because it means that I'm dependent on God all the more. um so talk to me a bit about your journey then, because obviously that's like the end of your, no doubt, the end of many years of wrestling with this condition, probably seeking God for healing on numerous occasions, doing whatever you can to overcome it, and then eventually, I suppose, not just making your peace with it, but finding joy in it because it brings glory to God and it's good for
Mm.
you and others. So, if you wouldn't mind, share with us some of your journey
Yeah.
to acceptance and then celebration of this.
Yeah, of course. I guess for me, it's going. I always never wanted to be dyslexic. I was never keen about any of this sort of stuff.
Mm.
And like my earliest memory is having a speech therapist around our house helping me try and do speech. Like I'd put a lolly in my mouth and go red lolly, yellow lolly, and I hated it. Like I couldn't do it. And I remember all through primary school, I was taken out on one-on-ones to strengthen my speech. So I never liked it. I guess how I've come to acceptance and how I've come to understanding is probably two major things. Is one, going, as I started to preach, as I started to do that stuff, I realized this is the thing I do what makes God smile. And that's not to say God doesn't smile the rest of my life. That's not to say anything like that, but it's going, this is the main thing I've done where I go, I was built for this.
Mm.
I was designed for this. And that's not me trying to go, hey, I'm amazing, this is great. But it's me going, there's loads of stuff I'm not good at. But when I do this, I know for some reason, somehow my body's programmed to do this, and this feels in holy, and this feels right. And there will be stuff for each of us that is their thing, what they can do. And that doesn't necessarily have to be something what is Christian in demonstration, like preaching. That can be architecture, that can be building, that can be anything. It's a thing for me where I go, this is what I was meant to do. So I have this understanding that I was meant to do this thing, but also understanding that I am totally broken in the thing that I'm meant to do. And then working for Kintsugi and just processing actually what is the art of Kintsugi. So Kintsugi, if you don't know, is a Japanese art form for mending broken crockery. In the UK, we have a pot, we break it, we will super glue it back together and hide the cracks. In Japan, they put gold powder in the glue and they make a feature of the cracks. Arguably, that pot is more beautiful. It is definitely more unique. And actually, it's me going, that is so true. That is so right. That in your brokenness, you don't have to hide it. You don't have to hide it, just guys. Actually, your brokenness makes you more unique. Brokenness makes you more beautiful. And I think going back to
Mm.
Corinthians, this verse, what Paul says about the thorn in the flesh. But then earlier on in Corinthians, he talks about how we have treasure in these jars of clay to show the surpassing power belongs to God and not us. These jars of clay, he's speaking about us. And the jars of clay he was speaking about in the time were these very cheap things. They were very easily broken. They'd get chipped. They'd have holes in them. Everyone had them. Paul was going, hey, you guys are like those jars. Very normal, very fragile, and very broken. But the treasure is in them. And
Mm.
actually, those holes, those brokenness, allow the treasure to shine through. So when I started to understand both those things, probably on a separate level, I started to simply make the connection and go, oh, wow, actually, my brokenness is also the thing I'm built to do. And probably I'm more qualified to do it now because I'm broken in it. If I was just someone who wasn't dyslexic, didn't have a speech impediment preaching, it'd be so easy to think, this is me. This is on me. I'm sick of this. I don't need God here. This is good. I can do this. But actually, my brokenness humbles those thoughts. I'm so thankful for that.
Mm.
I'm aware that if I wasn't broken, I probably would be very cocky about it all.
And this seems to be the, another part of the answer to the culture of performance as well, isn't it? Is realizing I'm not good at performing because I can't do this, but wow, God is using this for His good anyway, and so it frees you from the carousel of I must be strong, I must keep going, get back up again, keep going, get back up again, fight, I can do this by myself. It frees you from all of that because He says I can't do it in the first place.
And it's so much more relatable. And I've been saying for a while, I do this preach on this 2 Corinthians verse and doing this whole thing about how do you evangelize to young people when they're struggling with their mental health? How do you share Jesus to a generation who's struggling with mental health? And for me, the answer I get is show your brokenness. Nobody relates to perfection. And actually, if you're a young person, you're looking at your youth worker, if your youth worker never shares their brokenness, it's not a long shot for you to think. Those young people think a few things. One, they think to be a Christian, to be a youth worker, I need to be perfect and read my Bible every day. 2, my brokenness or my sin, and brokenness and sin are 2 separate things. I don't want to get those mixed. My brokenness disqualifies me from being in a relationship with Jesus. Because if your leaders don't demonstrate and share their brokenness, it's easy to think, I need to be perfect to do that. And the youth leaders don't mean that. The youth leaders are like, I'm so broken, I'm just embarrassed to share with my young people my brokenness. And I've realised, actually, people relate to brokenness 10 times more than they relate to your perfection. And this was cemented in me in the Starbucks logo story. So Starbucks, their logo is this mermaid. It's one of the most famous logos, most recognizable logos on the planet. The first edition of that logo, the Starbucks, it didn't work. So they got this first edition of the logo. It was the mermaid, and it was great. They gave it to the Starbucks team. And the marketing team was like, this isn't good. I can't relate to this whatsoever. They realized nobody could relate to it because it was perfect. So they added a flaw to their logo to allow it to be more relatable. If you look at the Starbucks logo, one eyebrow is longer than the other. There's a flaw to it. The marketing team at Starbucks knew if they want people to relate to their brand, they needed to make it not perfect. If you want people to relate to your faith, if you want people to see Jesus in your life, then you need to stop trying to pretend to be perfect. We as Christians are the first people to pretend to be perfect. I'm fine, God is good, life is good, all those things. Actually, we as Christians should be the first ones to be open and to be honest about our brokenness, because our brokenness is what demonstrates Jesus working in our life.
Yeah, that's really good. I think sometimes we feel the pressure that I'm representing Jesus. I've got to sell Jesus really well. I've got to have a really good life to. I feel like we feel as though we're on the back foot often before we've even started, and so we think, let me make a strong case for Christ. Let me show you that it's intellectually watertight, it's experientially entirely satisfying, that it cleans up. Being a disciple of Jesus cleans away all of your mess. And we think, that's doing a good thing. And then we forget that the one we're representing was not a pretty picture. He was a bloody mess that people turned their faces away, that people associated with being the scum of the earth. and mocked and humiliated his followers because of who he was and how he died. It was so shameful. And so we have this inbuilt kind of tension in our faith if we're able to see it. And yet, what you're saying just seems to be so resonant and necessary, because one of the things that I'm noticing from talking to people is, and it breaks my heart, is just how legalistic and self-righteous all salvation is outside of Christ. We're in a society that's as religious as ever. I was talking to some friends over the weekend who inadvertently, they didn't know they were doing this, but inadvertently they were trying to display their virtue as far as the environment comes to each other. Back and forth it went. And I realized there's just no grace. There's no salvation here. It's entirely effort. And you see this in young people, whether it's the performance culture. I've got to work hard. I've got to be beautiful. I've got to be strong. My mental health's got to be tip top. I've got to get all these grades. And it's just self-righteousness, self-justification without Christ. And without Christ, it's desperately sad, and it should break our hearts. And the way that we can help that, perhaps, is, as you said, lean deeper into what Christianity and what being a disciple of Jesus is really all about.
No, it really is. It's one, us lean into, there's a relief and there's a restfulness in knowing you're broken and knowing that's still okay. But then if you look outwardly on building the church, building sharing Jesus, is going, everyone else in this world knows they're broken. Like, you're broken. What people are looking for is an answer to their brokenness. And normally what Christians present is a be perfect and be like us. That's not attractive. That's not what people want. People are looking for an answer. There's something in our soul what goes, this can't be all. This can't just be it. There must be something else to make sense of all of this. And we probably need to do a better job of going, yes, this isn't all it. This is broken. But through Jesus, this is good. That is the answer to the problem. But sometimes we jump ahead towards Jesus and we forget to put in the context of actually we are broken and we still have Jesus.
That's really good. And I like you made the distinction earlier about boasting in our brokenness, not boasting in our sin. And that's an important distinction to make, isn't it? We're not like, hey, I watch porn as much as the next person, or I get drunk as much as the next person. Hey, it's fine. We're all broken. It's actually going, no, I really struggle with these internal desires towards objectifying other people or to meeting needs of insecurity in myself. And I turn to unhealthy sources as much as the next person, but I'm trying. That's, I think, the difference between, reveling in sin and boasting in brokenness, isn't it?
And brokenness is different. And this is where there's been a lot of pain previously in the church towards mental health. So an anxiety disorder isn't due to a lack of faith. Anxiety disorder isn't a sin, okay? There's a brokenness in this world like cancer is, like illnesses. And actually, if you want to go a bit more, cancer and all these brokenness is a result of the first sin, of the fallenness of this world, but isn't a result of a personal sin of the person who has it, okay? So it's realigning those things, because we as a church can sometimes go, somebody struggling with something like poor mental health, going, is there a sin in your life because of this? No, it's a brokenness in this world. And it's easy for no one would ever go to someone who has cancer, hey, the reason you have cancer is because you've sinned in your life. You wouldn't, would you? Like, it's no, this is just a rubbish part of being in a fallen world and a fallen humanity. But often we might go to someone who struggles with an anxiety disorder. Is there a sin in your life? No. We are in a broken world, and that is a rubbish part of society. So I'm aware my dyslexia is a brokenness. I'm aware of that. I'm aware I am broken, and my dyslexicness is a brokenness that isn't caused by a sin that I've done or by a sin that my parents have done. And that's the separation what I think we need to be more clear on, because if we don't be clear on the separation between brokenness and sin, it can lead to shame and guilt building up towards people who are trying to work out what's going on.
I think I completely agree. Here's a slight kind of bit of gristle in the machine, if you like, because Jesus says, "Do not worry about tomorrow," and because the Apostle Paul says, "Do not be anxious about anything." I can understand how individuals who suffer from an anxiety disorder live with and wrestle with a sense of shame. Like I'm not a very good Christian. I'm letting God down. Similar to perhaps, and this may be interesting to hear your comment, because as someone who's dyslexic, for whom books reading out loud doesn't come easily, in the church, it's a book-based faith. You no doubt will have grown up in church environments feeling a level of disconnection and even shame about that. So maybe there's a correlation between those two experiences that I'd love to hear your reflection on.
So the verses that we're looking at is "Do not be anxious" in Philippians, and Jesus saying, "Do not worry." These two verses, the Greek word for them both, the worry and the anxious, is merimnio, is the Greek word, and that by definition is to be fretful, to be worried, or to be anxious would be one of the definitions for it. That word is used a few times in the New Testament, and it is always used in relation to materialistic things. So the Jesus verse, "Do not worry about tomorrow." Jesus, just before that, is talking about how you can't have two masters. You can only have a master of God or master of money. One person can't have two masters. Jesus is talking about actually there's materialistic things in this world where you can't let control your life. Jesus there is going, "Do not worry about the clothes you're going to have. Do not worry about the food on your table. Do not worry about what's going to come tomorrow." Jesus then goes, "Because tomorrow has enough worries of its own." Jesus isn't saying, "Don't worry." Jesus isn't saying, "Don't be anxious." He's saying there's a few things, clothing, food, stuff. What is a worry? But actually, each day has enough troubles of its own. Don't get caught up in the money. That's what Jesus is talking about. Don't get caught up in having the master of money. There is worries in today. Jesus another time goes, actually, in this world you will find trouble, but take heart, I've overcome the world. So we see in this verse, "But do not worry," and Jesus going, he's not saying don't worry as a blanket statement. He's acknowledging there will be trouble. He's acknowledging there will be worries, but he's going, there's a few things where we need to be careful. And then in the Philippians verses, "Do not be anxious about anything, but in prayer and petition, give your thanksgiving to God." Anxious, once again, it's that merino word. It's talking about do not be worried about what you'll eat, what you'll sleep, or what you'll do. But if you are, in everything, with prayer and petition, give it to God. Paul was saying, don't worry about those things, but if you are worrying, give it to God. And the reason we know he's saying that is because in other books, Paul speaks about how he is anxious for people, how he is worried about what's going on. Paul is acknowledging there is worry in the world, but he's saying in these things, in these materialistic things, let's give these to God. Let's not worry about, let's not get caught up in the materialistic side of this world. But when you look at those verses from a very flat point of view, it can be so easy to be pulled out of context. And so often they've been pulled out of context and they've caused pain because they've not been set in their proper place. So it's interesting because people go, Jesus says, don't be anxious, or Jesus says, don't have anxiety or don't worry about stuff. The Garden of Gethsemane, where Jesus was about to get crucified, Luke says Jesus sweated blood. That is a condition where somebody is so anxious and so, it's a condition where if you're being led to death, if death is going to happen, or if you're in an increased level of anxious worry, there's a condition where you sweat blood, and that's your body reacting to your anxiety. Luke is saying Jesus was worried then, and of course he was. He was about to be led to the crucifix, wasn't he? He was worried. So when we look at the Bible in a whole, we see Jesus and Paul aren't condemning people with anxiety. They aren't condemning people who are struggling with an anxiety condition. What they're saying is as humans, we can get caught up in materialistic things. Let's make sure we put them in a proper place, because you can't have two masters.
Mm. That's so good, Joel. Really helpful, liberating for people. And it strikes me as well as it's so important, isn't it? Like, as we were saying with some other things a while ago, that we must think deeper about these things. We can't just settle for a skimming off of the surface, because that's always where you're going to encounter kind of thoughts and obstacles to your understanding. And often people just kind of go, oh, well, that's it then, and they kind of move on and think, I'm just going to live with guilt or live with shame, live with whatever. Whereas actually, when properly understood, when engaging with, if we take the word of God seriously as oracles from the living God, we ought to take the time to read it slowly and within its context. You wouldn't do that with any TV show. Just turn on a film halfway through and be like, oh, great, I guess the goodies die then. You're like, no, you have to watch the whole thing to understand it.
Oh, 100%. If I think of, let's take Lord of the Rings. If you switch Lord of the Rings on the point where Gandalf falls down the pit, you think he's dead. You turn that off. That's the movie. Well, actually, that's not what goes on. And often with the Bible, we can pluck these verses out. There's loads of verses, isn't it? What I called like fridge magnet verses, where we chuck them up. And they don't always mean, like Jeremiah 29:11, for I've got plans to prosper you, not to harm you. In the context, that verse is talking about a people group that are about to go into slavery. It's talking not about individual, but a people group going, hey, you're going to go into slavery. And for a while, it's going to be awful. And some of you will die there. Some of you will not get out of slavery. But you as a people group, you as a land, I promise that there will be plans to prosper you, not to harm you. What people don't see is there's going to be a generation of people in slavery and who are going to die in that. That's a less nice fridge magnet verse, but actually that's a more biblical verse.
It's really good, Joel. Really good. I just want to come on to something, and maybe this will be a nice little segue into the work of Kintsugi and exactly what you do. So you're absolutely right. Anxiety, cancer, it's not something that is necessarily because we've done something wrong, or isn't just handed down to us because our parents screwed up. Entirely right. There's also a slight caveat to that, I guess, in that the environments and conditions within which we live do provide the kind of unique cultural melting pot for some of our particular societal ills and difficulties that we struggle with. So who knows, maybe in decades to come, we'll understand why it is that we've seen such a spike in cancer rates. Maybe it's something to do with the microplastics or our diets, or who knows, but we understand we're not living in a vacuum. We're always living in an environment that shapes things. And when it comes to mental health disorders, anxiety disorders and things, I just want to quote some statistics, some things from stuff that you've written on or talked about. So there's been a 39% increase in a year of referrals for NHS mental health treatment for under 18s. That's significant. 46% more 15 to 19-year-olds committed suicide in 2015 than in 2007. We've seen spikes in the number of under 18s or 18-year-olds who say that they have psychological disorder. There's been a decline in the number of teenagers who report to saying that they are very happy, quote, with their lives. And a lot of this, stats and things have correlated this to the invention of social media, and particularly Snapchat and Instagram and stuff like that. But what it is all pointing to is that there is a social environment that does seem to exacerbate or make worse the problems that we all struggle with, or allow certain conditions for these potential problems to grow in and thrive in. So I'd love to hear your comments on some of that, and then also how you in Kintsugi Hope, what you're doing to try to change the environment within which people are swimming to help them better look after their mental health.
Yeah, so we've seen a massive spike in poor mental health, especially within young people, and social media is a big part of that, I believe. It's John Mark Comer who writes about how we were all meant to be built in villages, and your brain will have the capacity of knowing 100 people around that. Now you get 1,000 likes on Instagram.
Yeah,
our brains are at major capacity on all what's going on. And social media has increased this level of FOMO, or fear of missing out, and increased comparison. It's so easy for me to compare my life in bed, not doing anything, 9-to-5 job, to somebody who's traveling around the world on social media. Yeah. And we're seeing this increase in comparison, and an increase in comparison, an increase in the FOMO, the fear of missing out, I think can lead to poor well-being and emotional well-being. And there's two separate things here. You have mental health as in the illness, and you have poor well-being. A lot of us through COVID will have felt the impact of negative well-being in our lives. Some of us would have felt the impact of mental illness. Those are separate things, and the mental health continuum is a really helpful model for you guys to look at how do we place people in the continuum. That's really, really helpful. So, but back to the question, I think there's been an increase in all this stuff, massively due to social media, due to comparison. And if you want to go even more recently, I think of people right now, young people right now, in the past 3 years, they've had COVID, what utterly threw them. I'm not sure we fully realise how much COVID has thrown young people. We took them out of school for a year. That destroyed people's rhythms. Rhythms is a known helper for well-being. They lost friendships. They lost all what's going on. We then saw the unjust murder of George Floyd. It was a 16-year-old who created a petition for his police officers to be arrested. What got 19 million signs. It was young people who took the streets of this country to go, this is not right, and we need to stand up for justice. We then saw war in Ukraine. Young people saw that, not from newspaper articles, but from videos of people being blown up on TikTok. We saw that of people their own age having to hide in bunkers, having to hide in basements for fear of their lives. We then saw the Queen dying, and for some young people that affected them, others young people it didn't. But what the Queen dying represented was actually there is people old age, and everyone has people who are old age, and suddenly you go, oh, if the Queen can die, then so can my grandma. So could my granddad. We now have the cost of living crisis, what has had a humongous effect on young people because they're seeing the effect it is having on their parents, and that is being diluted into them. Not to mention, we've had lack of leadership in the government over the past few years. We've had governments saying rules and then, in some sense, breaking them. And that's not me saying anything apart from the young people are seeing a leadership what isn't authentic. We've seen police officers in the UK take and rape women who are police officers, people in authority. All of these things are saying to our young people, nothing is certain, and there isn't much hope. And actually, that is the breeding ground for increase in negative well-being. Because when you lack hope, when you struggle to know what's going on, it's hard to see the future. It's hard to see what's next. So I think we're seeing this increase in poor mental health for many reasons, and I'm not smart enough or clever enough to give you all the scientific reasons. But from speaking to young people and from speaking to youth workers, I think it's just understanding that young people aren't sure where the hope is or aren't sure where the certainty is. And that in itself is a heartbreaking place to be. So
I think you're right. I'd love to, I don't want mean to interrupt, but I think almost before we then come on to go, so what are we doing about it? I think what's Kintsugi offering? The first response needs to be to allow that to sink in, particularly for our churches, because I mean, adults are struggling, but I think what's needed is that adults recognize the particular pressures that a generation are facing that no generation in history has faced. You may say generations in history have experienced trauma, sure, but on their smartphones in their pockets, in their bedrooms, 24/7, they've no one's experienced that. And the first response should be one of lament, sadness, brokenheartedness and concern for the plight of young people, rather than a quick step to, come on, here's what you should do, fix it, just sort this out. I'll just switch off your phones then, or just don't give them screen time. I think it's not as straightforward as that. Let your heart break first.
Yeah, your heart needs to break, and it's the understanding our young people are more aware of what's going on than other generations, whatever. Like even with the war in Ukraine, and even with COVID, our young people had a death count on their phones every single day for a year and a half. 100 people died due to COVID. They were faced with mortality at a closer rate than any generation since World War II. That's an impact. Today, 10,000 people have died. Tomorrow, 12,000 people have died. That is a massive impact, just knowing that and being faced with that mortality. So yeah, we need to mourn. We need to go, this is really hard. But I think what we're good at doing is sometimes doing that. And sometimes what we're not as good as doing is going, what can I do? Because it feels so hopeless. It feels like, what difference can I make? What difference can I do? And actually, there's so much difference you can do as an individual. What young people need more than anything else is a safe space for them to process. And that's really what I'm asking churches to do, is please create a safe space for your young people to process what's gone on and be equipped to look after their own mental health. And we have material to help you guys do that. If you would prefer to go and create a safe space and do nothing with Kintsugi, you're still doing a great job. Because creating a safe space is what we need to be doing to allow young people to process. And what does that mean? Creating a safe space is allowing young people to breathe, allowing young people to be in a place where there is no judgment, where there isn't always trying to fix. Often at church, we want to fix people. Actually, people want to be heard and want to process what's going on. There's this thing called holding space for someone, what counsellors use. Holding space for someone is being physically, mentally, and emotionally present for someone whilst they feel their feelings. A key part of holding space is withholding judgment and trying to fix them. I know if a young person comes to me crying, going, "Joe, this happened," I instinctively want to go, right, this is what we're going to do. Here's the game plan. No. They want me to go, "Oh, that was hard. I'm sorry, that was really hard." And then you make a game plan. But we need to allow time for them to process. Go, "Oh, this has been hard." So I would love you to work out, how can you guys create safe spaces for young people to process? So what we've done is we've written a 6-week course. What you guys can do with young people is written through 7 different learning styles. Each learning style has about 2 to 3, 4 even activities you can do. So we train group leaders up. It's a couple-hour training online. We give you 100% of the material, and you're going to use 20 to 30% of it because you completely tailor it to your audience and your young people. It's very much down to you of how you want to do it. It's not us going, here's a one-size-fits-all approach. It's us going, you as youth workers, you as parents, you as teachers, you as people, you know what your local young people need because your journey with them. I know what young people need in Ipswich. I haven't a clue what they need in Newcastle. I can give you a good guesstimate of what young people need over the UK, but in a very hands-on approach, you need people on the ground. And that's what our material tries to do, is just equip the people on the ground with a load of good stuff and go, run with what you want to run with and leave what doesn't work for you.
That's really good, Joel. Thank you so much. What's the website and how can people find out more if they're motivated to do that?
Of course, you can go to kintsugihope.com. That is KINTSUGI hope.com.
Oh, fantastic. And for those church leaders and people in churches that have young people going to New Day, I mentioned at the start, I'm really excited that you're going to be there speaking in a couple of sessions and seminars, both to young people and also in a session equipping youth leaders. So people should get booked into New Day if they haven't done already and come
100%.
and meet you personally. I mean, it's just down the road from you as a Ipswich boy.
Yeah, it's great. I'm coming into enemy territory before Jesus.
I know, I was going to say, Ipswich and Norwich are arch enemies, aren't they, and rivals? So I might have to out you and tell everyone you're an Ipswich fan in broad daylight.
Sounds good. I reckon for a few days I can manage it in enemy territory. But after a few days, I might have to go home and get some more of the Ipswich blood in me.
Joel, thank you so much for your time today. Just as we close, is there anything else that you think? I just want to leave you with this before we finish.
Yeah, it's a repeat of everything we've already said, but it's when you personally understand your brokenness, but can personally see what Jesus is doing through your brokenness, suddenly life's a lot easier because you're not trying to live up to this perfection standard you've set for yourself. But you start to have this deeper understanding of going, I'm not perfect, and that's okay. And actually, maybe my imperfection is what God is going to use to do some incredible things in my life.
Amen. Amen. Thank you so much. God bless you, and look forward to hearing from you again soon.